Welcome. My name is Ben Haggarty, and for many years I've told stories at the British Museum's Young Friends Sleepover events. And these are truly wonderful events, but unfortunately today we cannot be in the great walls and under the great roof of that mighty institution. Never mind. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, one long and one tiny, to celebrate Midwinter. Once, long ago, there was a hunter, and he was dressed all in green. He had a great red beard, and his job and his duty each day was to go into the forest to hunt game for the royal table. And one day, he was in a part of the forest he'd never been in before. And suddenly he saw a movement in a bush. There was a creature there. He raised his crossbow to his shoulder, and he waited to see what it was. But then the creature came out. It was a deer. It was a small deer. But it was like no deer he had ever seen before. This deer was blue. It had a beautiful blue fur. It had tiny golden antlers, and all down its spine were little silver crescent moons. And that hunter, he grinned and thought to himself, "Not only will I be paid well for the meat, but I'll be paid gold for its skin." And he squeezed the trigger, and the little arrow, the dart, shot swift and accurately and hard and struck the little deer in its neck. And the deer fell forward on its forelegs, fell backwards on its hind legs, and rolled over onto its side. The hunter put down his weapon. He drew a knife and he went towards that deer. He was going to dress the kill. He was going to open its belly. He was going to take out its guts so he could carry the meat home on his shoulders. But in order to do that, he had to step over the deer. So he did. He stepped over the deer and he reached down to take one of the legs. But in doing so, he noticed that his hand had changed. It had lost all the redness from the skin. The dark hairs were gone. The hand he was staring at was pale and delicate, as was the other one. And as he glanced down, he saw that his green robes had quite disappeared. He was wearing a blue velvet dress. He dropped the knife. He reached up to his face. There was no beard there. In stepping over that blue deer, the man had become a woman. She hitched up her blue dress. She jumped back over the deer, but there was no change. She jumped a second time. There was no change. And the deer had gone. The man who had become a woman didn't know what to do, and so made her way back towards the castle. Well, it just so happened that the king of that castle, the master, was not married at that time. And it was the king's evening custom to take a walk at the woods just at sundown. And as he went to the edge of the forest, who should he see coming towards him from the woods but quite the most beautiful woman he had ever seen before in his life? And the hunter, the man who had become a woman in every way, and she found herself looking at the king through completely new eyes. And to cut a long story short, the man who became a woman became a wife, became a queen, and within the year became a mother. She gave birth to a little baby boy, a prince. And the years passed and the years passed, and the king and the queen, they were happy together, and the little boy grew well and healthy. And when he was 7 years old, one afternoon, The king and the queen, they were out in the forest. They were hunting. They were hunting boar, wild boar. And you hunt wild boar with a long iron spear. And the boar is a dangerous creature to hunt. A boar is heavy, large. It rises from the ground. It has tusks. And the queen, she became separated from the main hunting party, and she found herself in a part of the woods that looked strangely familiar. And there, on the ground, on the path, lying on its side, was a blue deer. She took her spear and she stuck it in the ground. She went towards that little blue deer. It was as she remembered it. The arrow still through its neck, the blood trickling, warm as if it had just freshly been killed. The antlers were gold and gleaming, the little crescent moons down the spine, and the fur so blue. She hitched up her skirts, and she jumped over that blue deer. And in jumping over the blue deer, she immediately felt an enormous change, a transformation through her body. It became strong. She opened her eyes, and she saw that her hands had changed into hoofs. Horses' hoofs. White fur. In leaping over that blue deer, the man who became a woman, who became a wife, who became a queen, who became a mother, became a great stamping, snorting mare. And the mare, she leapt once and twice again over that blue deer. She did not change, but the blue deer vanished quite away. The great horse went crashing through the undergrowth, galloping back towards the castle. And there at the castle, there was distress. The queen was missing. All night long, with burning torches, the king led his servants looking for his wife. But the queen was never found. And the 7-year-old prince, he wept at the loss of his mother. And the only consolation to that family was a beautiful grey mare that had come from the forest. And the king, he embraced that mare, and he rode that mare. And later in the year, he put a stallion across that mare. And later still, the mare gave birth to a foal, a beautiful little colt, which was given to the prince as his own horse. And the years passed, and the years passed. And the prince was now 17 years old. And it had been Christmas. And the custom was, after Christmas, the next day, the Boxing Day, to hunt the fox. And the king was out on his grey mare, hunting the fox with the rest of the hunt. But the fox is a cunning creature. And the king, he saw it and he chased it, but soon realized he was separated from the rest of the hunt. And the fox was leading the king a merry chase. The fox saw something that the king had not seen. As it made its way through the forest, it saw a low-hanging branch, and the king, so intent upon catching and killing that fox, didn't see the branch. Too late. It caught him under his chin, lifted him from the horse, and he fell back to the ground. And the grey mare stopped. She'd heard a terrible cracking sound. She turned, and she could see that the king in his fall had lost his life. And then the mare looked around. There was something familiar about this place, and ahead of her there was the blue deer. She made her way towards it. Its antlers were golden, the crescent silver on its back, the blue fur, the little arrow in its neck, the trickling blood. The mare, she leapt over the blue deer, and she had her eyes closed. She sensed a change in her body. She opened one eye, she looked down, No longer was there a hoof. No longer was there white fur. No, the fur was black. And there was a paw, and there were claws. And in leaping over the blue deer, the man who had become a woman, who had become a wife, who had become a queen, who had become a mother, who had become a mare, had become a bitch, a she-dog. And the she-dog leapt twice more over the body of the blue deer, and the blue deer vanished. The dog went towards the body of the king and tried to drag the body of the king with its teeth. But the king's body was too heavy. And so the dog, the hound, went streaking back towards the castle, where stood a young man, 17 years old. And though he didn't know it, he was already king. Because when the king is dead, long live the king, the crown doesn't even touch the ground. And a strange black dog came running from the woods and tugged at his trouser and made him follow her to the body of his dead father. And he brought the body of the king back to the palace. And there was a funeral. And the only consolation was this beautiful she-dog. He put a he-dog over her, and within the year she gave birth to a puppy, one solitary puppy. And the years passed, and the years passed. And now the young king was maybe 21 years old. And he was out riding in the forest on his horse with the two dogs at his heels, when suddenly the she-dog, she sniffed the air. She smelt something strongly familiar, and she streaked away through the undergrowth. And she ran straight to where there was, lying on the forest path, the blue deer. And she looked at it. And then she leapt over it. And in leaping over that deer, she sensed a change. And when she opened her eyes, she found herself staring not at paws and claws, but at ruddy hands and dark hairs and a robe of forest green. In leaping over the blue deer, the man who had become a woman, who had become a wife, who had become a queen, who had become a mother, who had become a mare, who had become a bitch, had become himself again. And the blue deer was quite gone. So the hunter, dressed in green, chose to bide his time in the woods. It was Christmas. And there are 12 nights of reveling and feasting after Christmas. And every evening the young king was entertained in the court by various musicians and storytellers. And one evening there was a troupe there, entertaining, with music, with juggling, with tumbling, with stories. And at the end of the event, at the end of the entertainment, the leader of the troupe came forward and said, "Majesty, and now we come to the end of our act. Which would you rather see? A trick or a marvel?" And the young king thought, a trick, conjuring, the illusion of magic, I can see that any day. But if you can show me a true marvel, something really wondrous, then I'll double your pay. "Ha! You've chosen well!" And the leader of the troupe of entertainers summoned two of his colleagues who came with a great chest. They raised the lid of the chest and they took from that chest a board that was covered in a piece of blue velvet. And then the blue velvet was pulled back and there was a painting, there was a portrait. And the young king found himself staring at a portrait of quite the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen in his life. Truly, she is a marvel. Who is she? She is our queen, and she has sent us out into the world because she's looking for a husband. I would marry her, said the young king. It's not quite as simple as that. Our queen has said she will only marry a man who can tell 3 lies which are not lies. Well, then they'd be truths. No. That is the mystery. That is the marvel. That is the puzzle. That is the enigma. 3 lies which are not lies. Only they will satisfy her. Well, the young king, he took down the particulars of the whereabouts of that queen. He paid the entertainers handsomely, and then he turned to his advisers and said, tell me now, 3 lies which are not lies. But as he listened to the responses, all he heard were lies which were lies, or truths. That night he couldn't sleep. All he could see in his mind's eye was the beauty of this radiant woman and her blue dress. The next day he asked every single person in the castle, from the porters and the servants and the stable hands and the gardeners, to his advisers again, for 3 lies that were not lies, but nobody could help him. And another night he tossed and turned, and on the 3rd morning he took his horse and he took his little hound, and he saddled the horse and he went for a ride in the forest to breathe good, clean air, to clear his mind. And as he got further into the forest, from behind an oak tree suddenly came a great man, dressed in green with a red beard, who said, Majesty, why do you look so troubled this day? And the one on the horse looked down and said, who are you? Ah, I am a hunter who in the past served your father in ways that you'll never understand. Why do you look so troubled? And the one on the horse told the hunter dressed in green the whole story of the enigma. And the hunter, he grinned. A great smile broke through his red beard. Majesty, are you ready to make a journey now? Without looking back, come follow me. Why, said the one on the horse. Because I know 3 lies which are not lies, and I have no desire for marriage. And if we were able with my lies to satisfy the queen, I would happily cede my place to you. Do you want to come? What are we waiting for, said the one on the horse. And so they made a journey. And it didn't take a long time, and it didn't take a short time. And they found themselves riding into the courtyard of that great queen. And there she stood, with her hands upon her hips, with her blue dress, beautiful. And beside her there was an iron cauldron, and it was set upon a pile of wooden sticks, a fire that was set, kindling that was not yet lit. And in the cauldron was water, and floating in that cold water a lump of meat. And as the young king rode in on his horse, he stopped and he said, Mistress, Majesty, that portrait that you sent out into the world did not do justice to the beauty that I see before me now. But that's what they all say. Why have you come? Do you know 3 lies that are not lies? And the young king said, Mistress, in truth, I do not know such things. But my servant here, he says that he does. He says that he has no desire for marriage, and that if he were able to satisfy you, he would cede his place to me. She looked at the one on the horse. Well, it was to marry one such as you that I sent my servants out into the world. But, and she looked at the hunter, if you are wasting our time, then your head leaves your shoulders and it goes up there. And she pointed. And the young king and the hunter turned, and they saw over the gate, the entrance to that courtyard, there was a rusty spike, and beside it 2 hungry-looking crows. by now all the people from the courtyard had come. From the castle, its strange occupants, they crowded everywhere. Everyone was gathered. And the queen, she said, "Well then, tell us your first lie, which is not a lie." The one dressed in green, he stepped forward, and he looked around, and he said, "My lie, which is not a lie, is that I am the mother of this young man." Everybody stared at the hunter, none more so than the young king on the horse. But the queen, dressed in blue, she said, "His lie is not a lie. Look, the kindling has caught." And they all stared, and there, through the dry sticks, orange flames began to curl. "What is your second lie that is not a lie?" "My second lie that is not a lie is that I am the mother of this horse." And he put his arms around the horse, and the horse nuzzled his face. Everybody stared in amazement, but the queen was looking at the pot. "His lie is not a lie, because see how the water boils and bubbles. What is your third lie?" "My third lie that is not a lie is that I am also the mother of this little dog." And the dog leapt up and licked his chin. And everybody roared with laughter because the queen was saying, "His lie is not a lie. Look, the meat in the pot, it's cooked." And everybody cheered. And she looked at the young king and said, "I would be happy to marry one such as you. But first," and she turned to the hunter, you who have gone through so much to bring your son to me as my husband, what do you want? I can give you anything in return." And the hunter, dressed in green, looked at everyone and said, "All I want simply is to be allowed to turn my back and go into the forest, and there make my home in the wild and stay there to the end of my days." And she, "You can do that. And if you wish, you can stay in those woods, not only to the end of your days, but to the end of time." And she and the hunter, they looked at each other, and he nodded his head. And then he looked at all that were assembled in the courtyard, and he stroked the head of the little dog, and he patted the mane and the neck of the horse. Then he looked up at his son, and he took his son by the hand, and he kissed his son's hand. And then he waved to everyone, turned his back on them, and walked straight out of the courtyard, away from the castle, and into the world. And there, back at the castle, there was a wedding. A fabulous wedding. I wish you'd been there. Maybe you were. And if you can remember, maybe you can remember what we ate. Yes, those of us who were there, we feasted well on meat, on deer meat, on the meat from the pot. And what color was the deer that it came from? Blue. And the queen and the young king, they lived together well to the end of their days. But as for the hunter, dressed in green, if you go out into the forest at any time of the year, whether it be in high, rich, green summer or leafless winter, sometimes, if you're very quick, very sensitive, he can still be seen just there in the corner of your eyes. And if you want to know what his name is, look to some of the old English pub signs, because there it will be. Or go into an old and ancient church or cathedral, and maybe you'll see that face carved in stone, the face of a man with a beard, surrounded by leaves, known to all and everyone as the Green Man. Long ago, in Russia, far east of here, there was an inn, a large hotel, and it stood on the road that led from Novgorod to the mighty city of Moscow. This inn was owned by a man called Ivan. It was Ivan's inn, Ivan's inn. Ivan was a kind and generous host. And here in that inn, every evening he made his guests welcome. He fed them good food. He gave them the finest drinks. And their mattresses were comfortable and people had a good night's sleep. The positioning of this inn was several hours' journey outside Moscow. It was perfect for the cattle drovers. Cattle drovers are shepherds and cowherds, even goose girls, those who drive to the markets the big cattle, the cows, the bulls, the oxen, and the little cattle, the sheep, the goats, and the geese. They drive them down the road to the markets at the gates of Moscow, so that they're there, ready for the market to open just after sunrise. There were fields all around where the stock could be kept safe overnight, and then they would be entertained, have a good night's sleep, and be up early and bright the next day. But, and in every good story, there's always but. But one time, I don't know how, the story doesn't say, Ivan's inn became plagued by mice and rats. And no matter how much he used cats to drive them away, the mice came back, the rats came back, and the cats just fled into the day. And soon, no one could get a decent night's sleep there. If you tried to lie on your straw mattress, all you could hear all night long were rat weddings and mouse funerals and rat parliaments and mouse courts. It was dreadful. And weary, sleepless drovers said, it's no good staying at Ivan's place. Better to just push on through. And in the matter of a few weeks, all of Ivan's business just disappeared. Eventually, there was so little money coming in that he had to say goodbye to his cooks, say goodbye to his servants. He had to do everything for himself. And then winter came and the snow was bitter. And day after day, night after night, no one came. One evening, Ivan was alone in his inn. The only thing to keep him company was the tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock of a great clock. When suddenly, at the door, he heard the sound of somebody stamping their boots. And then the door swung open and in came a great man with a fur hat and a great fur cape over his shoulders. He was covered in snow. He took the hat off and he shook the snow onto the ground, and he started to take the cape off his shoulders. And Ivan ran to his guest, ran to his customer, took the hat and hung it on a peg, and took the coat and took it to the mantelpiece and hung it from a hook by the fire, and said, do come in and sit yourself down and get yourself some warmth here, and can I bring you anything? The guest, who was an old man with a great grey beard and grey eyebrows and long grey hair, said, yes, do you have vodka here? Of course I have vodka, said Ivan. Then bring me a glass, just one. Now vodka is Russian fire water. And if that sounds like a contradiction, it's ice cold, but it burns you, and they call it the water of life. Ivan came over with one glass and poured a glass of vodka there for his guest, and the guest picked it up and said, it's bad luck for a man to drink on his own. Get yourself a glass. I'll treat you to a glass for yourself. Well, thank you, said Ivan, and he got a glass and poured himself some vodka, and the two of them, they struck their glasses together and they drank them down. Have some more, said the guest. And they drank a little bit more. And then they started to talk about this and that. And suddenly the man looked at Ivan and said, Ivan, I have to confess something. I'm a drover, but I'm poor. And tonight I have no money in my pockets. I can't pay you for those glasses of vodka that we drank. Now, normally, Ivan, he was a kind man, but he was also a sensible businessman. And if somebody came in and couldn't pay for their drinks, well, Ivan would frown at that. And certainly if someone came in, ordered himself a drink, and then ordered one for the barman, but couldn't pay for it himself, then Ivan in other times would have probably taken that fellow by the scruff of his neck and thrown him out into the snow so he could have a good long think about what he'd just done. But there was something about this man. There was something so pleasant in him. His being was so radiant and warm that Ivan said, it's no matter. Here, have another drink. And they drank another glass, and here, have yourself a little bit of bread, and have some meat, and have some cheese. And he fed his guest. But then the guest said, I have to be off. You're not going to spend the night here? You're welcome to. I'm not going to charge you for it. No, I have to be in Moscow early. And the man took his hat, put it on his head, took his cape, put it over his shoulders, opened the door, picked up his staff, and went striding out into the night. And Ivan said, what sort of cattle are you taking with you? He said, I'm taking little cattle, very little cattle. And Ivan closed the door. And Ivan was there, and suddenly it felt very empty. And the only company he had was the clock. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Suddenly he wanted to make sure that man was all right on the road, and he opened the door and he stepped out, and the moon was shining fat and full, and all the snow-covered fields were glistening white and bright, and there, striding down the road towards Moscow, he could see the figure, tall, with his hat and his cape and his staff. But there weren't any goats, there weren't any sheep, there weren't even any pigs or geese there. What sort of little cattle, then, is he taking? And Ivan stared. And now he saw that the whole road in front of that man, the snow-covered road, was a seething mass of grey and white and brown and black, and little pink ears and long, long tails. He was driving with him every single one of the mice and rats that had infested Ivan's inn. That night, the only sound was of the clock tick-tock and of Ivan gently snoring. The next day, a drover came by, And though he'd been warned off spending a night there, he spent a night, and in the morning he said, "I had the best night's sleep I've ever had and most wonderful dreams." And he mentioned it to someone else, and who mentioned it to someone else, and within a week everybody who'd ever been to Ivan's Inn was coming back there, because news had spread. It was no longer plagued by the mice and the rats. Well, when spring came and the snows melted away, Ivan was walking past the local church, and he suddenly thought, "You know, that visitor brought me such luck. I ought to light a candle to the patron saint of good luck." And so he went into the church. And in a Russian church, there's a great wall of beautifully painted icons, images of the saints and the holy figures from the Gospels. And he went towards the patron saint of good luck, whose name is Saint Nicholas. And Ivan took with him a little candle, and he set it there on the ledge. And he looked up at the fine portrait of the saint. And then he saw that the face on the portrait was very familiar. It had grey hair, grey eyebrows, a grey beard, and a softness in his dark eyes. It looked so like the man who had visited that night and taken away the mice and the rats. And when Ivan looked down at the candle, there were 2 small silver coins. The cost of a couple of glasses of vodka.